All right, guys, today shouldn't be quite as bad as last time. This one here is tangent and cotangent graphs. They look different than the sine and cosine, so that's why we do them separately. They don't actually have amplitudes. They have stretches, but not amplitudes because they go on forever. So make sure you got your calculator out, you got your graphs out, and let's go. All right, we're going to do tangent and how tangent moves and cotangent how it moves. We're also going to look at secant and cosecant graphs. They are the inverse of your sine and cosine, so they actually have asymptotes also, like the tangent and the cotangent. All right, a tangent graph we know repeats every pi, or it's pi long. It goes from negative pi over 2 to pi over 2. So if you remember when you did those two at the 90s, those were undefined. So these are your undefined graphs. When you look at your tangents, that's when you were dividing by 0, right? Nothing's different. When you look at 0, you're dividing by 1, so it's 0. And then when you look, so you got 0, you're dividing by 1 is 0. When you go to your 90 or your pi over 2, it was undefined. So we also go backwards at negative 90 pi over 2 or 270. It's also undefined. So I need some points in between. So we go to pi over 4, and that gives us 1 because that's the square root of 2 over 2. And the same one over here, the 45s gives us 1. And those are the graphs we graph in, and this is your tangent wave. And then it repeats every pi. So every pi, you get an asymptote, and then pi away from 0. So at pi, the actual pi, you get your zeros. Then up 1 over 1 on each, and you sketch them in. So let's go. It works the same way as sine and cosine, except now that we don't have the 0 to work with, we do it a little differently. We take our inside term, our bx minus c, and we put it between the negative pi over 2 and the pi over 2 because those are our asymptotes. We solve by adding the c and dividing by the b, and that will give us our critical points on our graph. All right, now 3, when you look here, the a is not actually a max or a min this time, it's a stretch. So it will stretch how fast the tangent line increases, but it does not change that it still goes on for infinity. So let's go here. We're going to find the asymptotes first because normally they're at negative pi over 2 and pi over 2. So we set the inside part equal to 0, and we solve for this, so we divide by 2, and we get negative pi over 4, roughly here. Put this down. So here's pi over 2, here's about pi over 4. So negative pi over 4 is at 0, and so is pi over 4. So you draw in your asymptotes or dashed lines because they are not part of the graph. All right, so this gives us our asymptotes for our graph. Now, the tangent or the amplitude of 3 says we go, all right, halfway in between negative pi over 4 and pi over 4 is 0. So that's my first graph. So the first thing you find is you find the midpoint. So you just add and divide by 2. Now, halfway in between those two, so this time I got 0, so between 0 and pi over 4, you add and divide by 2 again, and that's pi over 8. So halfway between these two, right here, you go to your amplitude, which is not really amplitude, your stretch of 3, and then halfway again is negative pi over 8 is negative 3. So this just increases much faster. So it's getting closer. Oh, that was a terrible, terrible line. Okay, you're doing better than I am at graphing, right? Let's do that again. All right, so we go down, go through our center, a little better. All right, and that's your graph. And then this keeps repeating. So since this is this far apart, then your next asymptote would be here, and we can continue to draw these in, which we are not going to do at the moment. Okay, hopefully wordability decide, there it goes, decide to work, and we're good to go. All right, I would like you to try yours. So pause and give it a shot. All right, I hope you did a good job. Step 1 is you're finding your asymptotes. So you take x plus pi over 4, you set it between negative pi over 2 and pi over 2. Subtract your pi over 4, and you should have gotten negative pi over 4 and pi over 4 for your asymptotes. So you should have graphed those in first. Negative 3 pi over 4 and pi over 4. That's where your graph is undefined. Now you find the middle of those two, so you add and divide by 2. You got negative pi over 4. That's your 0. So you put negative pi over 4 and you mark your 0. Now you found the middle between negative pi over 4 and your asymptotes. So you add those together. Negative pi over 4 plus pi over 4 is 0. Okay, this is the right. So we know this is really 0, 1 normally, but we're multiplying by 2 because of our stretch. So we multiply by 2 and we go up to 2 at 0. Same thing on the other side. Negative pi over 4 and your negative 3 pi over 4. Added together divided by 2 is negative pi over 2. Okay, without a stretch, that would have been negative pi over 2 comma negative 1. But you need to multiply by your amplitude, which gives you a negative 2. And that's your tangent graph. Not a lot different than your cosine and sine other than the look. Okay, cotangent works identically, except now it goes between 0 and pi is where it repeats. So you go 0 and pi instead of negative pi over 2 and pi, and it goes the opposite direction. It goes 1 down to negative 1, but your zeros and everything are the same. It has the same period. Same thing, you set your middle equal to 0 to find where you need to be, and you graph this. So here our period is 3, or not our period, I'm sorry, my amplitude or my stretch is 3. We take x plus pi over 4, we set that equal to 0, which gives us negative pi over 4. I'm sorry. This is what we put between 0 and pi, my fault. Subtract your pi over 4 from both sides, and our asymptotes are negative pi over 4, which is your first one you should draw in, and 3 pi over 4, which is roughly about there. Your asymptotes, you find the middle, so you add those up and divide by 2, and then your middle is your 0, and you put this on your graph. Next, you find the middle between those two. So we got my 0 on my graph. We go to negative pi over 4 plus your pi over 4. Divide by 2 and we've got 0. So at 0, we go and we multiply that by our 2, our amplitude, and that's up here. Now we go to the other side of our graph. So the 3 pi over 4 plus the pi over 4 divided by 2 is pi over 2. So we go to pi over 2, and that is the negative part of our graph, so negative 2. And sketch in your cotangent graph. Well, maybe if he will draw. Sometimes Word absolutely hates me. Let's see if we can get this to go. Okay, let's try it again. Sketch in your graph. Now it's in the wrong spot. It is not going well today. I'm hoping yours is better. Let's try this one more time. If it doesn't work, I'm going to assume you can know what I mean. A little closer. All right, sketch it in, and that's one of them. That's all I actually require. I know your book tells you to do 2 or more, but 1 is fine. All right, pause and do yours. Okay, you had a very tiny graph this time because we have to get 3 cotangents in the spot we usually have 1. So you divide it by 3, so your asymptotes were at 0 and pi over 3. So this guy is very thin. Okay, now you found your middle, so you added these 2 and divided by 2, and you get pi over 6. This is where you put your 0. Now the middle between 0 and pi over 6, so you add and divide it by 2, and you get pi over 12, which is your 1. Now the middle between pi over 6 and pi over 3, you're added and divided by 2, and you get pi over 4, which is your negative 1. And you connected those together. Cosecant and secant. We're not going to do a ton with these, but just a little. Remember, they're inverses of sine and cosine. So to actually graph these, what we do is we graph the, let's go back up. We graph the sine, I'm sorry, I went too fast. You're here. So if I want to graph the cosecant, just a normal cosecant graph, the first thing I graph is the sine wave. So remember, sine is 0, and then pi is 0, 2 pi is 0. At pi over 2, it's 1, and at 3 pi over 2, it's negative 1. The cosecant is the inverses, so wherever this hits 0, it is now undefined. So the graph itself is this asymptote. So every place you see a 0, you put an asymptote. Now, your max here actually becomes your min. So it's like a little parabola in here. And then your min here actually becomes the max of that section of that graph. And you just draw them in. And that is now your cosecant. The same with the secant, except you base it off of this cosine wave. Now, let's go down and try one. When you go here, we do the same thing. We know that cosecant now is 2 pi because it's based off a sine, and it's x plus pi over 4. So the first thing we do is we change this from cosecant to sine because we know how to graph the sine wave. We know the sine wave is x plus 1/4, so we are going to take x plus pi over 4 equals to 2 pi. We're going to subtract the pi over 4, so x is now equal to 7 pi over 4. So that's where it's going to end. So now my first graph is going to shift negative 1/4 to the right. So what we're going to do is we're going to take my sine wave. It's going to end at 7 pi over 4. It's going to start at negative pi over 4. Halfway, 3 pi over 4. Halfway between those two is my 1. And halfway between those two, the 5 pi over 4 is my negative 1. Now, that is not my graph. That's my sine wave. So wherever the zeros are the asymptotes for my secant. I'm going to graph all those in, or cosecant, I'm sorry. My max is now my min, so that u goes this way, and this u goes this way. And we're done. All right, now try yours. All right, you should have recognized that secant is the opposite of cosine, so we're really going to graph 2 cosine 2x. Amplitude is this 2. Period was the 2 pi divided by 2, which gave us pi. Okay, pi divided by 4 is every fourth. That's my critical points. Remember those? There is no phase shift. So it goes 0, pi over 4, pi over 2, 3 pi over 4 pi. Okay, I know that cosine is 0 at the middle two. I know the first two, the first and the last are the max. Well, those are generally 1, but with an amplitude of 2, 1 times 2 is 2. And this one's 2, and then this is my min, which gives me negative 2. And I graph this in. I'm actually going to graph 2 of them, just so it's a little easier to see. So we just go from pi, I just take this guy and repeat it. So I went to pi, so there's my 1s, halfway in between was my min, halfway in between were my zeros. All right, now let's go to the red graph as your actual graph. So wherever there is a 0, that is where we have our asymptotes, even though that disappeared on me. Okay, so there's my asymptotes of my graph. Wherever there's a max, that's the min. Wherever there's a min, that is now the max of that section of, oops, I missed the graph. And that is all I'm going to expect for cosecant and secant. All right, good luck on your homework. I hope you do a great job. Don't forget to post questions.